Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight for our April webinar, Inspiring Curiosity with Wildlife Cams. I'm really excited to talk to you about this topic because I think wildlife cams in the classroom have so much awesome potential for building connections to nature and for inspiring some really cool learning opportunities. So a quick review for Zoom. We're probably feeling all pretty familiar with webinar platforms these days, but just in case, when I shared my screen, it probably went full screen for you. I'm going to recommend that you exit full screen. You can do that by finding the options button, or even for some folks, hitting escape will work. And this will allow you to dock the chat window to the right side of your screen. We're going to have several opportunities throughout this webinar to share our thoughts. So I want you to be able to see what everybody says. So to find the chat window, you're going to look for the little speech bubble icon that says chat, and over where you enter your text, just above there, you'll find a little drop-down menu. Make sure you change that to say chat to everyone. That way we can see each other's ideas as we progress through our webinar tonight. So we are coming to you from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, where our mission is to interpret and conserve the Earth's biological diversity through research, education, and citizen science focused on birds. My name is Kelly Schaefer, and I'm the outreach coordinator for the K-12 education team. And I'm joined today in the chat window by Steph, who is our project assistant, and she will be sharing links with you all and keeping track of questions and answering some for you, flagging down others for me to answer. So feel free to chat with Steph in the chat window. And on the K-12 education team, our mission is to create innovative resources and deliver transformative trainings that empower educators to build young people's science skills through nature, citizen science, and inquiry. And in today's webinar, I'm really excited to discuss wildlife cams with you. And we're going to look at several aspects of wildlife cams. First, we'll talk about the different kinds of wildlife cams and discover some from around the world. We'll then look at some free resources that are available to you to support science learning with wildlife cams. So we have a variety of resources that you can check out, and also have the opportunity to discuss some tips and tricks about how to get the most out of your wildlife cams in the classroom. So feel free as we go through to share any ideas you have in the chat window. Also, if you have a favorite cam that you like to view, would love to see those in the chat window, and maybe we can check our chat log after the webinar and gather some of those suggestions to share in a follow-up email. So feel free to share your ideas. So let's talk about what I mean when I'm talking about wildlife cams. So I don't really mean the trail cam images that you see where you're capturing a still image of an animal in the wild. Those are awesome, and there's great projects you can do with those too. But for today's purposes, we're really talking about live streaming animal cams. So these are cams that run typically 24/7 and give you this really intimate glimpse into the lives of animals. And there are tons of different varieties out there that you can check out. You can see a couple images here. We've got bear cam featured, and also an image from the Monterey Bay Aquarium. So all sorts of different types of cams out there. So let's dive into some of these different types of cams. You'll see I have 3 listed here on the screen, and there are pros and cons to all of them. It just really depends what you're looking for and what type of cam you're going to choose for your classroom. So the first one you may be familiar with are cams at animal shelters or farms, more domestic focused cams. You'll see puppy and kitten cams a lot of times online, and these are charming and they can be really great stress relievers and fun brain breaks. And I'm sure they have their place in the classroom, but they're not really what we are going to focus on today. Another type of cam that you'll see a lot of are cams at zoos and aquariums. There are a couple of cams in this image from San Diego Zoo. They have a ton of cams for all sorts of different animals. So a growing number of zoos and aquariums are really hosting these live streaming cams now. They are going to be captive animals, so you may not be seeing an animal in its native habitat, but a big pro of using these cams is that you're typically more likely to see the animals since they're in predictable places. And so if you're more likely to see them in action than maybe you would in a wildlife cam that's out in nature where you might tune in and nothing's happening on the screen at that moment. So lots of great options for that, great options for getting to know a certain animal species really well. This could be a really good option if you're interested in looking at animal behavior and just practicing observing those things. Like you'll be more likely to see the animals consistently on these cams. And then there's wildlife cams or cams that are out in nature. And these give you a more true picture of how animals behave in their native habitats. But as I mentioned before, that also means that you might not see them because they might not choose to be in that area at the time that you have the cam running. It also means that you might see something disturbing because you're seeing real life nature. So you might see an injured animal or an animal eating prey. And so if you plan to use a cam like this, you want to be prepared for that possibility. And so when I was looking at wildlife cams and thinking about wildlife cams for this webinar, I noticed that there were a lot of different decisions that you might have to make as you were planning to use a cam in your classroom, just because there's such a diversity of wildlife cams available to you. So there's the choice we talked about just before about captive versus wild, and those pros and cons of always around, but maybe not in their native habitat versus in their native habitat, but maybe not so reliably available. Then there's also terrestrial versus aquatic, and you could make a decision based on what topic you're teaching or based on interests that you have personally or your students have personally. I know my boss comes from a love of scuba diving and, will sometimes just have one of these cams on in the aquatic areas because she just finds that really soothing. So lots of cool options available out there to you. A somewhat related cam, but not necessarily a wildlife cam in the way that we're talking about, is there's some great like deep sea exploration cams that they live stream their expeditions and people are operating these things remotely, and you get to hear the scientists be like crazy excited about the things that they're seeing in the cam. So that's a different experience, but it can be really cool too, just seeing experts in their element being totally stoked about a little squid that swims by. So there's advantages to those types of cams as well. Another decision that you can make is whether you want to focus on local cams. A lot of states, like your Fish and Wildlife Service, might have some cams in your local areas, and they can be a really great way to connect and get a glimpse of your native wildlife. Versus a worldwide cam, where if you are studying a specific area or a specific subject, it can be a really cool way to bring that area to life for your students. So thinking about, there are some cool cams out there on like watering holes in South Africa, for example, where you could see a variety of animals interacting. And it could be a really cool way to kind of connect to that place that you're learning about, or those animals that you're learning about that are too far away to see in their native habitats in person. And then you can also make decisions about whether you want to really focus in on a single species or you want to look at a diversity of life. So in that watering hole cam example, that would be an opportunity to look at a diversity of life where there are other cams out there that focus in on one particular species. And we'll look at a couple of those examples tonight. And another would be, what kind of life cycle stage are you interested in seeing? So that comes to mind most for life cycles might be the nest cams. So there are a ton of cams out there that focus on nesting birds and give you a really amazing and intimate look into the complete nesting cycle of these birds. You can see them lay eggs and incubate the eggs, watch the babies hatch, watch them grow and eventually fledge. So that can be a really amazing way to tie into learning about life cycles. It's also really powerful, I think, for connecting to the struggles that animals face and also making connections to their own lives so kids can see the growth of these young birds or other animals and make connections to themselves and their own experience in their own lives. So this can be a really intimate and powerful way to view animals, but it is, again, one that you need to be a little aware of, that things can go wrong when you're watching a nesting bird. There's predators, there's things that happen, and we can talk more about that in a little bit. All right, so I want to throw it out to you, an opportunity to brainstorm a little bit. What are some benefits of using cams in the classroom? If you used them before, what have you seen for benefits for yourself or benefits from the student perspective? Or if you haven't used them before, like, what are some benefits you anticipate you could see? Feel free to share your responses in the chat window. Hi, Heather. Sorry you've got snow. Thanks for joining us. It was snowing here in Ithaca not that long ago, too. Charlie's asking if we are any favorite nest cams. If anybody else has ideas about their favorite nest cams, feel free to share them. Charlie, I will talk about several, and we can even, if we got time, jump over to the Cornell lab cam and look at several. Paul saying that using wildlife cams gives kids an opportunity to see something that they may never have seen before. It awakens a sense of adventure and a love for nature. Love that. Laura's saying that she's used bird feeder cams to do systematic observations. Very cool. Mike's saying that it can help urban students connect to the experience of nature. They're saying you get to see a close-up view of the animals. Bobby's bringing up an interesting point about this unique tool and this idea of liveness and how that plays a special role in allowing audiences to feel closer or more intimately entwined with nature. Observing without disturbing. I love that too, Laura. So yeah, there's a lot of great ideas coming up in the chat window that I can't quite keep up with. So I love it. I love to hear it. Personally, I've had experiences where wildlife cams help me feel less stressed, just tuning into a bird feeder cam and listening to the sounds and seeing birds go about their daily lives. You'll hear from teachers who have used these cams. Actually, I think I've got that in my next slide. You'll hear from folks who have used these cams in their classroom that it really promotes a sense of curiosity and authentically inspires students to ask questions about what they're seeing. There's lots of social emotional benefits too. There's this engagement piece that a lot of people brought up, the relaxing stress relief piece. And we've actually seen that, connecting to nature in this way can help boost moods. And of course, there's lots of opportunities for connecting to our STEM content. So lots of opportunities for learning and building connections and getting engaged and excited. Awesome. I love that there's still ideas coming in the chat window. Okay. So another brainstorm I'd like to throw out to you is, what sort of things would you consider when choosing a wildlife cam? Just a quick note that this screenshot is from I think it's explore.com. And it is a really awesome resource for finding live cams. There's just such a huge variety. You can search, as you can see in this screenshot, by different sorts of categories like oceans, birds. Okay, so while you're thinking, let's see if a couple ideas have come in. Mike's saying you want to think about weather and durability, connectivity, price, resolution. So I think Mike is thinking along the lines of setting up your own live cams. So yes, definitely those are all things you'll want to consider. And if that is something that you are interested in doing, you should definitely reach out to us, and I can hook you up with our bird cams team. And they have some great suggestions and write-ups about what type of equipment they use and what things you might want to consider. So Bobby's saying that his area of interest is teaching sustainability to preschoolers. So for that audience, one of the elements you need to consider is cuteness. Yeah, that's a great thing. Like, there are different things that you need to consider for different age ranges and what is going to really capture the attention and inspire your audience. And Heather's mentioning considering standards and the units that you're teaching. Alignment and age appropriateness. Awesome. Thanks for sharing those ideas. So some other things to consider that were coming to mind for me was activity level. So thinking about the timing of when you are going to be wanting to use these cams. So both seasonally and the time of day. So if you're going to be checking cams in the morning, how likely is the cam that you want to look at to be active? If you want to do nesting birds, that's got a certain window. If you're looking at the Northern Hemisphere, you want to time it for summertime. But there are cams out there like our albatross cam that's set up in New Zealand, and they have about a really long, several month long nesting cycle. So cams like that will be available at a different time range. So really getting to look at what's out there and considering the timing of when you want to do your unit and how that relates to the cams that you can choose. And as other people were bringing up in the chat window, the kind of activities you want to do, the lessons and standards that you want to meet and how they align with what you're teaching. And one of the pieces of advice I can give is you might need to have a backup cam available. Sometimes something happens and a cam goes out, or you're anticipating watching the nesting cycle of this one bird, but the nest fails early on. You might want to have something planned as backup. And I see a question in the chat window about whether Cornell has some bird cams. We have lots of bird cams out there, some on feeders, some on nest sites, and some on one we'll look at on a, well, I don't want to give it away, but one, a special one we'll look at today. And as I mentioned before, there can be some unpleasant events that happen if you look at a live cam, such as predation. If you're watching a bird of prey live cam, you might see them bring back some prey to the nest. And of course, this opportunity for connection that you all brought up. This quote is one that I've found very powerful when I think about my practice and why I care about helping people connect to the environment. And it's a quote from Stephen Jay Gould that says, "We cannot win this battle to save species and environments without forging an emotional bond between ourselves and nature as well, for we will not fight to save what we do not love." And while having this kind of remote viewing opportunity, you might think, well, is that really forming that strong of a connection? But there's actually been some cool research that is saying, yeah, actually, it does form a pretty strong and meaningful connection. So there were some researchers from East Carolina University and Kansas State University that were looking at wildlife cams and whether they can create emotional connections between viewers and wildlife. So they were actually looking at a park in Alaska. So this was a national park and preserve in Alaska. The name is escaping me right now. Katmai, maybe? I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, so apologies for that. And they wanted to see whether online site visitors, so people who are viewing bears through their bear cams that they had going, or on-site visitors, they wanted to see who would have a stronger support or interest in the parks and these protected areas. And so they actually found that after watching the bears online, viewers self-reported an increase in their interest in the parks and protected areas, as well as having a strong emotional connection to the bears. And in fact, these online viewers actually showed a more broad support than their on-site peers, even though the majority of them had never set foot in the park. So some very cool research supporting that. There's not a ton of research into this area yet, but this is some really cool research showing some support for that connection aspect that you all brought up as well. So let's dive a little bit more into this idea of what to do about upsetting events. So I'll describe a couple for you, and while I'm describing, if you want to share how you might go about dealing with them with your classroom, I would love to hear about it. So these two images show some things, some little examples of what you might say. So the first image on the left is a black rat snake getting into a nest and eating an egg, versus on the right, we're seeing a kestrel bring a small snake to its mate in the nest box. So you're going to see predator and prey interactions. There was an eagle cam where a house cat got brought to the nest. And so you might have to deal with something like that if you're watching the nests of a predator. So there's all sorts of different things that you might see related to that. There's also a chance that you might see injury or starvation, or a parent bird might disappear. There was, oh gosh, it was a barn owl cam in Texas. This would have been a number of years ago now during a flood, when there was not enough food and the babies started starving because the parents weren't able to feed them. And what happens in raptors is, especially in owls, is there's some incidences of siblicide. So the siblings started to attack each other in this extreme situation. And so that was really, really disturbing for the public. This was a cam that Cornell ran, and there was a lot of strong feelings that were brought up about that, and a lot of debate around, are we simply observing or do we interfere in this instance where things have gone so poorly? And we've actually never run that cam again after that season because it was so challenging. So that is an extreme situation and not one you are likely to run into, but there is a chance that you might see something, a glimpse of how challenging surviving in nature can actually be. And people can get really attached to these birds, and especially I'm thinking Cornell has a pair of red-tailed hawks that nest on campus and have their own nest cam, and people get really attached to the birds. And one year, one of the mated pair that was coming year after year died. And so you might see something like that as well. And Janice is saying that you need to forewarn and make sure they understand the interactions in the ecosystem. Yeah, I think that is a great point. Let them know that they are seeing nature live and that there are challenges and struggles that these animals face, and you're going to be seeing those. And it can help to discuss what it means to be a predator if you're watching a predator cam, and what kind of things these birds eat so they know what to expect. Let's see, Paul is saying that you can't ignore what these things are and why they happen. Explaining nature is more important, and it's just as important as talking to your students about what they saw and how they feel and how to cope with these issues. Yeah, so talking through the feelings, explaining what they saw, putting it in the context of ecosystems, those can all be great tools. Thank you for sharing your ideas. And feel free to keep sharing them in the chat window. So now I want to jump into some of the resources that we have available. This next set of slides is going to be pulled from a combination of things. So we have a resource called Science and Nature Activities for Cooped-Up Kids that has a section on observing and asking questions that some of these slides are pulled from. You also see soon some slides on animal behavior that are pulled from a bird behavior lesson. So that's a great resource available to you. The slides are at a K2, 3, 5, and 6, 8 grade level. You can download them and present them yourself, but they were actually designed during the pandemic to be somewhat self-guided for the older students. So there's lots of opportunities to get great content and even provide your students with a learning opportunity outside of class, a self-paced sort of learning journey. All right, so let's talk about one of the key things we're doing when we're watching animal cams, observation. So how would you define observation? And while you're thinking, a quick note that if you can find a piece of scrap paper somewhere nearby, we'll have a couple little activities where you might want to jot some things down. Objectively watching, use of your senses, using senses to collect data. Recording what you see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. Keeping in mind that not all senses should be used. That's true. Don't want to taste everything that you're observing. Using your senses to notice things. Awesome. Lots of great keywords and definitions coming through. So there's a couple ways to answer this. The observations are kind of the base of the science process. And as you all said, that involves using your senses to record what you notice or about the world around you. What's great about building our observation skills is it's a really key part of the science process. These observations can often lead to really authentic questions that you can turn into opportunities to research or do a study or capitalize on that natural curiosity to further your learning. And what I love about observation is it's not a skill you have or don't have. It's something that you can build over time and with practice. So I want to do a quick little observation activity with you all. We're going to watch a short clip from a cam in Panama. And this is going to be a cam about some birds. And I'm not going to tell you anything about it first. I want you to just go in and make some observations and write down at least 3 things that you notice about the bird's appearance and 3 things that you notice about their behavior. And I'll let the clip play for just a couple minutes. So if you have paper handy and you want to jot it down, that would be great. I'll ask you to share some observations you make after we watch our clip. So let's go ahead and get this going. Oh, hang on. I want to make sure that you can hear sound. So let me check my settings real quick. Okay, I should be sharing sound now. Let's go ahead and give this a play. All right, so I'll go ahead and call it there. So what did you notice about the bird's appearance? For me, I think the first things I noticed had to do with the color. Yes, brightly colored. That's really striking. Red crown, bright coloring. They don't blend in with their environment. That's a cool observation. That they're similar looking. Both birds looked pretty much the same. Colorful blue, black, and red. Colorful, some questions, maybe the same sex. Maybe they were both males. They raised their tail often when it comes to behavior, absolutely. I see some people are starting to make some inferences. Must have been spring if they were doing a mating display, or maybe there's some competition to lure females. Ben's making an observation about the size of their beak. Yeah, feel free to jump into behavior things now. They were jumping in a pattern. They hop. They seemed like they were mirroring one another. These are great observations. Simultaneous sounds, like remarkably simultaneous. I was so impressed. Very chatty. Laura was picking up that there was a date shown on the cam. Jumping into each other's spaces could have been aggressive or intimidation. Cool. So I noticed that we are making some observations. We're also starting to make some inferences about what those observations mean. And that's what's so cool about these cams, is it gets you naturally into these things. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But I wanted to introduce you to the bird that you were looking at, which was the lance-tailed manakin. And as some of you guessed, we were seeing two males. So the female is pictured over here on the right-hand side. So it has that same red crest, the same shape and size, but the body is a much duller color. Oh, sorry, that's the immature male. The female doesn't appear to have the red crest. And these are lek mating birds. So what you were seeing was the display perch. They display in pairs with an alpha male and a beta male, and they have this sort of coordinated display that they do when a female is nearby. And then eventually the male that's the partner and helping in this display will leave, and the main male will continue the performance and hopefully mate with the female. So there's some cool things that you can learn about mating systems and styles from this, and questions that might come to your mind. Well, why does this other male help this main male? Yeah, like a wingman, exactly. What's the benefit there? And it's such a precise and coordinated display that there's a lot of experience necessary to be good enough at it to be successful mating. So there's that benefit of practice that the wingman, but yes, so cool mating system, cool bird to learn about. This image, this screenshot here is from ebird.org, where you can read a little bit about all the bird species in the world. But if you want to check out and learn more about this bird on Cornell's bird cams site, cams.allaboutbirds.org, we'll get you there. That might not be it'll redirect if that's not the exact right one. Has this cam on this display perch that you can check out, and they have this great write-up about what's going on. So we talked a little bit as we we're going through this about the difference between observation and inference, and this can be a really cool thing to dive into with your students. So as we said, observation, using your senses to perceive the world. What is it that we are directly seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, or feeling? And an inference is using our background knowledge to draw a conclusion or make an educated guess about something we've observed. So it's an interpretation of what you've observed. And so some of you all were noticing that these look to be brightly colored. And so you know that males are often brightly colored. So you were making the inference that these two brightly colored birds were males. And you were seeing these kind of back and forth displays. So you're wondering, is this aggression? Is this intimidation? I saw some people bringing up that maybe this was to attract females. So those were inferences you were making based on your background knowledge. So just another example is if you were outside and walking around and you noticed a Canada goose and that it was making a hissing sound, that would be an observation. If you thought the goose might be upset because it was defending its goslings, that could be an inference. Another one is an observation would be my cat is purring. An inference would be that it feels relaxed. But I've learned recently that cats can purr for all sorts of different reasons. So that might not be exactly why your cat's purring. I heard it explained to me once that they're kind of saying, don't leave me sometimes, which how can you ever stand up and go to the bathroom if your cat's on your lap purring, if that's what they're saying? So observations and inferences. So now let's do another little clip And I'll ask you to write down some observations about what you're seeing and then make some inferences as well. So this is going to be a cam in Savannah, Georgia. It's a great horned owl cam, and we will see if we can get that to go full screen. Gosh, baby. I don't like seeing that chick so close to the edge. Okay, so let's see if we can't get out of full screen mode here. Pardon. Okay, there we go. So would love for you in the chat window to share an inference or an observation that you made during the video. And maybe like on the previous slide, you could mark whether it's an inference or an observation with an I or an O. Arlene noticed that there were feathers everywhere in the morning shot. Elizabeth made the observation that the chick was crying and the inference that it's saying, "Feed me." Yeah, so I'm seeing a few noticing the size of the bird being small, so and then making the inference that it's the offspring or a young chick. Adorable floofball would not count as all that scientific of an observation. I don't know. If it goes into your notes and it helps you identify the creature again in the future, it sounds good to me. The inference is that there must be a dead bird somewhere coming from the observation of all the feathers, for sure. An observation is that an adult brought food back to the nest. An inference would be that the chick was full, then the mom could eat. Okay. Seeing lots of interesting observations and inferences. So Elizabeth shares another one that there's rustling feathers and constant wind noise, and so made the inference that the nest was high up. Very cool. So I don't know if you caught the title of that video when I hit play, but this was a great horned owl bringing in a barred owl to the nest to feed their young chick. And turns out that great horned owls are actually a known predator of barred owls, which is not something I really knew before. So yeah, that's the sort of thing you might see on a cam that you watch with your students. Okay, there we go. That wasn't gonna let me go to the next slide. All right, so these are some behavior slides that are pulled from the Cooped-Up-Kids lesson that I mentioned before. And so we have a lesson that starts to look at 5 different types of common bird behavior, and we use bird cam clips to illustrate those behaviors. The first one is courtship. So when birds spend a lot of time trying to find and keep mates through singing, displays, or defending a territory. So the behavior we saw with the long-tailed manakins would be courtship behavior. And here, this image is of Clark's grebes, and they're famous for doing these really impressive dances to pair bond with their mates. Another type of behavior you'll often see is parental behavior, like we saw for the great horned owl clip, where you might see birds building their nests, incubating eggs, and feeding their young. You might also see anti-predator behavior, so reactions to predators that are around, or behaviors like warning calls that you might observe birds making. I'll play these little cams real quick from our clips from our feeder cam here in Ithaca. You can see in this paused image, there's a hawk, a sharp-shinned hawk sitting right there. So here we see the birds all scatter, and then the hawk come through. So that would, and then we hear all these warning calls start in the background. And here's a clip of Cooper's hawk. This is also on the same, our pond cam, making that dash, and then you could hear all the wing beats of birds fleeing. Here they are looking cautious and hunkered down. And they scatter. And I don't know if you caught the hawk was right in that corner in that last clip. So anti-predator behaviors. And then foraging behaviors. This one's pretty self-explanatory. Animals spend a lot of time foraging for food. So searching for, finding, and eating food. And then another behavior that you'll see a fair amount of when it comes to birds is feather care, or for other animals, grooming behavior. Because these feathers and fur are really important, not just for attracting mates, but for regulating temperature, for being able to fly. Obviously, the animals with fur won't be flying, but temperature regulation is a big one for all animals. So those are the 5 different types of behavior that we're going to look at for the rest of this activity. I'm going to play you a little clip. There's going to be 2 different types of behavior in this clip, and I'd love for you to share in the chat window what 2 behaviors you think you see. All right, so we've had two different types of behavior happening in that clip. Foraging, for sure. There's a mourning dove in the background and a blue jay in the background, hanging out, having some snacks. And then we're seeing a couple that might be saying courtship or parental behavior. Good question. So courtship, you might see birds fluttering, you might see them feeding each other. In this case, we're looking at foraging behavior and parental behavior. So if you look at these two birds side by side, you might notice that one looks duller, brown. It's got this little tiny gape in the corner. It has the dark eyes. So this is actually a fledgling grackle being fed by an adult. But courtship is a really great guess too. You'll see similar behavior in courtship displays sometimes. All right, let's do one more. There's two types of behavior in this as well. Oh, geez. Here we go. Oh, I blew it. I showed you the answer. Sorry about that, but we'll watch the video anyway and see if you can pick the types of behavior we're seeing. So in the beginning of the clip, we saw the eagle preening their feathers, running the beak along it. And then this behavior is the anti-predator behavior. As Paul says, called mobbing. And I think I saw in the chat window earlier someone saying, always listen for mobbing. So yeah, if you hear little birds really freaking out, particularly if you hear crows really freaking out, always a good idea to take a look around. Sometimes you'll see a cool bird, like a hawk or an eagle, or you might see a black rat snake. I found some really cool things by listening to yelling birds and trying to see what they were screaming at. So crows in particular are excellent mobbers, and they have a particular dislike for great horned owls. So always worth keeping an ear open for angry crows. So those are a few different types of behavior that you might see on bird cams, depending on the type of cams you're using. Another resource we have, kind of currently our main free resource, is Life in a Nest. It has 4 lessons that you can download for free, and it talks about using bird cams in the classroom. So have some of the tips and tricks we discussed today. Also has some lessons to support watching nest cams with your students. We will be releasing soon an educator's guide to bird cams. So that will be kind of our newest version of this resource. It's not quite out yet, but keep an eye out for that this year. If you're on our e-news, you'll get notified when we release new lessons and guides like that. All right, let's dive into some final tips. It's a great idea to share the efforts that you're doing in your classroom regarding bird cams with parents. There's cool opportunities to connect to classroom learning with these cams, and also continuing the learning at home by letting parents know what cams you're watching. And you might find that your students choose to tune into these cams even beyond their time in the classroom. We've had a lot of educators share that they love to have the cams on during downtime. So they might have a bird cam on when students first come into their classroom as a way to get them kind of quiet and settled, and provide us a focus for their attention. And again, as we've talked about several times today, keep in mind that this is real life. Prepare your students for the sorts of things they might see on the cams, and be versatile and have a backup plan. And feel free to share any other tips or tricks that you might have from any experience you have using cams in your classroom. And we have just about 5 minutes left. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat window. If you are interested in a letter of completion for attending this webinar, we'll share a link where you can download the form and you can put in your name and use that as your completion letter. So Charlie's asking about recommendations for cam hardware. That is something I would suggest you email us about. You can email us at k12lab@cornell.edu, and we will forward your question to our bird cams team, who has some great information regarding that. And if you want to stick around for a couple minutes, I'll head to our cam website and show you just some of the cams we have available right now. I do want to share that if you do check out our bird cams, we often have highlight clips and clip reels from exciting behavior that we observe. So that clip I shared of the mannequins doing their dance was one of the recently shared highlight clips. So if you tune into a cam and there's nothing happening live, you can always use some of these clips to curate some behavior you want your students to be able to see or keep an eye out for when they're watching the cams live. Yeah, thanks everybody so much for coming. Feel free to dash if you need to dash. There's just about 4 minutes left, so I am going to jump over to the lab website. Hopefully you're still seeing my screen. So we're going to go to allaboutbirds.org/cams. And you can see all of our cams that we have live. Here's, oh, I said long-tailed mannequins. They're lance-tailed mannequins. Mannequins don't have long tails. And so you can see the highlight clip that I grabbed for today's webinar that happened just a few days ago. We can tune into this cam live, which I imagine will be nighttime there. Oh. Usually you can still see the cam with the infrared, but my guess is it's kind of duskish, so you can't see it well. But what's great about these cams is you can also go back a little bit in time and find something cool happening, like our lance-tailed mannequins here. Another place I want to point out to you is this page where you can see all the cams at once and see the different options that you have. Here's the albatross cam I mentioned that's set up in New Zealand, and we can go see that it's daytime there, and we have a pretty well developed chick hanging out doing some preening behavior on the nest. Good question, Kirsten. Are there any cams that students will be able to manipulate reaching left to right? I'm not sure. I know there are cams where that's possible, and there are some users who have permission to do that, but I don't know if there are cams where just like anybody who's watching can. There might be a process to be able to have that ability. I think the background noise we're hearing here is just the camera noise and some wind noise. And then let's see, we can check in on our barred owls. See what they're doing. So here's live look at the nest. Looks like we've got some incubating happening. So lots of opportunities to check out different cams. I'm just kind of fascinated watching the way her feathers move. And those big eyes. And what's great about these owl cams is they have this infrared, so at night you can see what's going on. And so here's a clip from recently that the mate bringing a mouse to the female. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, everybody. It is 8 o'clock now, so I want to thank you for joining us, and I hope that you came away with some ideas and plan to use bird cams with your students. Appreciate your time joining us tonight, and I wish you all a happy and warm and refreshing spring. Again, feel free to keep in contact with us. Our email is k12lab@cornell.edu. Take care, everyone.